Imagine someone handed you this image without a caption. From high above, you can see narrow rivers splitting into smaller streams. Valleys spread across the landscape in branching patterns. Dark shorelines outline enormous lakes. Everything about the scene feels familiar. You would probably say you are looking at part of Earth. You would be wrong. This is Titan, a moon orbiting Saturn, nearly 1.5 billion kilometers from the Sun. Its surface is so cold that water cannot flow. At almost 180 degrees below zero, water freezes into something as hard as stone. It forms cliffs. It forms mountains. It becomes the ground itself. And yet, Titan has rivers. Titan has lakes. Titan has clouds. It even has rain. Not shapes that merely resemble rivers. Not ancient cracks that happen to imitate drainage systems. Real channels connected to real lakes inside an active weather system. Every one of those observations has been independently confirmed. For decades, scientists believed rivers belonged to one ingredient above all others: liquid water. Titan refused to obey that rule. The first maps revealed branching valleys almost indistinguishable from river basins on Earth. The first photographs showed channels descending from bright highlands onto broad plains. Later observations found smooth, liquid seas stretching across its northern hemisphere. Then storms swept across the sky. After the clouds disappeared, enormous regions of the surface had turned dark, as though rain had soaked the frozen ground before slowly drying again. Every new observation made the contradiction worse. The landscape looked more like Earth. The temperature insisted it could not be. Somewhere inside those two facts, one assumption had to fail. Either these rivers were not really rivers, or Earth had taught us the wrong lesson about how worlds create weather. By the end of this investigation, one idea will not survive. That rivers, lakes, clouds, and rainfall belong to water. Because Titan proves something far stranger. The landscapes we recognize are not created by Earth's chemistry. They are created by the laws of physics. And on Titan, those same laws built an entire world where water became rock, while something else took its place. They searched for the simplest mistake first. Perhaps the landscape only looked like a river system. From orbit, that was still possible. Radar can reveal shapes, but shapes alone cannot tell you whether anything has ever flowed through them. Then a probe descended beneath Titan's permanent orange haze. As it drifted toward the surface, the blurred world slowly sharpened. Bright highlands emerged from the mist. Dark channels cut through their slopes. Those channels did not wander randomly across the terrain. They joined together, growing larger as they descended before opening onto broad, flat plains below. It was exactly how rivers organize themselves on Earth. Not because they are rivers. Because flowing liquid always follows gravity. The closer the probe came, the harder it became to dismiss what it was seeing. After landing, Its cameras captured a surface scattered with rounded blocks of water ice. They were not sharp fragments broken apart by freezing. Their edges were smooth. Some were flattened. Others had been polished against one another. On Earth, rocks acquire shapes like these after being carried, rolled, and ground together by moving water over long periods of time. Here, the rocks themselves were frozen water. Something else had done the moving. The river network returned once again. The same branching valleys that first appeared in orbital images were now connected to real landscapes seen from only a few kilometers above the ground. They were no longer abstract patterns. They were valleys descending through hills toward open plains, following routes carved by flowing liquid. One explanation quietly disappeared. These were not accidental shapes. They were genuine drainage systems. Only one contradiction remained. If liquid had carved this landscape, what liquid could possibly exist on a world where water had become solid rock? If water had been the liquid, the mystery would already be over. But every measurement from Titan's surface pointed in the opposite direction. The temperature remained close to minus 180 degrees Celsius. Water could not collect in lakes. It could not fill rivers. It could not fall as rain. If liquid existed anywhere on Titan, it had to be something else. The first clues came from the north. Radar images revealed immense dark regions stretching beyond the horizon. At first, they looked like smooth plains. Dark surfaces are common on distant worlds, and darkness alone proves nothing. Then the radar signal returned. Instead of scattering in every direction, part of it reflected almost perfectly back, like light bouncing from the surface of a calm lake. Solid ground rarely behaves that way. A mirror-like reflection usually means one thing: a remarkably smooth liquid surface. The question was no longer whether Titan possessed liquid. It did. The next question was far more unsettling. What was the liquid made of? Infrared observations supplied the missing piece. The large northern seas were not filled with water. They were dominated by methane, mixed with ethane, simple hydrocarbons that on Earth exist mostly as natural gas or fuel. On Titan, they had become lakes. Entire seas stretched across the polar landscape, their surfaces lying quietly beneath an orange sky where sunlight was little more than a dim glow. The contradiction that opened this investigation had finally broken. The rivers did not belong to a frozen water world hiding impossible pockets of liquid. They belonged to a methane world. The familiar landscape had survived. Only its chemistry had changed. Yet that answer immediately created a larger problem. Lakes alone cannot build river networks. A few isolated pools cannot carve branching valleys across an entire moon. On Earth, rivers exist because water never stays in one place. It evaporates. It forms clouds. It returns as rain. If methane had truly replaced water on Titan, then it could not simply fill lakes. It would have to do everything water does, including becoming weather. Clouds alone prove very little. Earth's sky is filled with clouds that never produce rain. Titan could have been the same. For years, that possibility remained open. Then the clouds began to move. Bright storm systems appeared over regions that had been quiet for months. They grew, drifted across the landscape, and then disappeared back into the orange haze. Days later, the surface beneath them had changed. Areas that had once reflected light now appeared dramatically darker. Not by a few kilometers, by nearly 500,000 square kilometers. An area roughly the size of Spain had suddenly darkened. Nothing had reshaped the terrain. No new impact scar had formed. No volcanic eruption had covered the ground. Only one thing had happened overhead. A storm had passed. The darkened landscape did not remain forever. Week after week, it slowly brightened again. Whatever had soaked the surface was disappearing, not flowing underground, not freezing into permanent ice, evaporating. The sequence was impossible to ignore. Clouds. A darkened surface. Gradual drying. It was the same chain of events that follows a rainstorm on Earth. Only the liquid was different. The river network returned. Those branching valleys were no longer isolated landforms left behind by an ancient climate. They were connected to active lakes. They lay beneath storm clouds. They belonged to a world where liquid was constantly moving between the surface and the atmosphere. The landscape that first looked strangely familiar now carried an entirely different meaning. The rivers were not simply channels filled with methane. They were visible pieces of a complete weather system. A weather system operating at nearly minus 180 degrees Celsius. One assumption quietly disappeared. Methane was not merely replacing water inside rivers and lakes. It was rising into the atmosphere, condensing into clouds, falling back to the surface, feeding rivers, refilling lakes. The same geometry, the same cycle. A completely different substance. Only one contradiction remained. Why could methane perform every role that water performs on Earth, while water itself had become nothing more than Titan's bedrock? The answer had been hiding inside the contradiction from the very beginning. Titan was never missing the ingredients for weather. It was operating under different rules. Return to the first measurement. The surface temperature, about 94 Kelvin, nearly minus 180 degrees Celsius. On Earth, those conditions would end the water cycle instantly. Oceans would become continents of ice. Rivers would freeze solid. Clouds would vanish. Rain would become impossible. But Titan is not governed by water. Its atmosphere is thick, with a surface pressure about 1.5 times greater than Earth's. Under those conditions, methane occupies the place that water occupies here. It can exist as a gas. It can condense into clouds. It can collect as liquid across the surface. The chemistry is unfamiliar. The physics is not. Look at Titan again. The clouds no longer seem out of place. Neither do the lakes. The rivers no longer appear impossible. Each one belongs to the same continuous cycle. Methane rises from lakes into the atmosphere. High above the surface, it cools and condenses into clouds. When conditions are right, those clouds release methane rain. The rain feeds drainage channels that carry liquid downhill. The rivers empty into lakes and seas, and the cycle begins again. Every observation gathered over years of exploration now fits inside a single picture. The smooth northern seas, the branching river valleys, the seasonal storm clouds, the vast darkened plains left behind after rainfall. None of them require separate explanations. They are all expressions of one climate. The contradiction that opened this investigation finally dissolves. The problem was never that Titan possessed rivers. The problem was assuming rivers belong to water. On Earth, water became the working fluid because Earth's temperature and pressure allow it. On Titan, those same physical roles are performed by methane instead. The recurring river network appears one more time. Its shape has not changed since the opening moments. The narrow tributaries still merge into wider valleys. The channels still descend toward broad basins. From orbit, it still looks unmistakably like Earth. Only now, the landscape is no longer pretending to be familiar. It is revealing something much larger. The geometry of a planet does not remember the chemistry that created it. It remembers only the laws that shaped it. One final question remains. Is Titan an extraordinary exception? Or has it exposed a rule that reaches far beyond a single moon? Titan is not an exception because it has methane. It is extraordinary because it proves that our definition of an Earth-like world was incomplete. Throughout this investigation, the same river network has appeared again and again. At first, it looked familiar. Then it became impossible. Later, it became evidence. Now it becomes something else entirely. Proof. Not proof that Titan somehow hides liquid water beneath an orange sky. Not proof that the laws of physics have been suspended on the edge of Saturn's system. Proof that landscapes are shaped by processes before they are shaped by materials. Independent observations all point to the same conclusion. Radar mapped branching drainage networks stretching across the surface. Visible light images revealed valleys descending from rugged highlands toward broad plains. Infrared measurements identified methane and ethane filling Titan's lakes and seas. Atmospheric observations watched storm clouds form, move, and disappear. After those storms, vast regions of the surface darkened before gradually brightening again as the liquid evaporated. Meanwhile, direct measurements on the ground confirmed the world where water remained permanently frozen into stone. Each observation came from a different instrument. Each measured something different. Surface shape, liquid composition, atmospheric behavior, environmental conditions. None depended on the others. Yet every one led to the same world. A world where methane performs the work that water performs on Earth. Look once more at the river network. Nothing about it has changed since the opening scene. The valleys still branch with the same elegant geometry. The channels still converge toward lakes. From orbit, anyone familiar with Earth would still recognize it as a river basin. The object itself never changed. Only our understanding of it did. At the beginning of this documentary, the rivers seemed to prove that Titan must somehow resemble Earth. Now they prove almost the opposite. The resemblance exists because both worlds obey the same physical principles. Gravity still pulls liquids downhill. Fluids still erode landscapes. Clouds still transport material through the atmosphere. Rain still reconnects sky and ground. Those rules survive even when the liquid itself changes. The investigation began with one assumption. Rivers, lakes, clouds, and rain belong to water. Titan never challenged the existence of rivers. It challenged the assumption behind them. On this distant moon, water became the mountains. Methane became the weather. And together they produced a landscape that, at first glance, could easily be mistaken for our own. The branching river network returns one final time, not as an impossible object, not as an unexplained mystery, but as the visible signature of a complete methane climate, where rivers, lakes, clouds, and rainfall emerge from the same physical laws that shape Earth, even though every drop is made of something entirely different.